need to operate the system. And that might sound obvious, but it's been, I think, a bit of a learning curve for all of us. And in the early days of Regen, we focused very much on getting renewables connected to the network. And that, if we listen to our political masters recently, that seems to be very much their focus. But that's great. We can build loads of renewables, but we need some wires to connect them to. And once they're all connected, it all needs to operate as a safe, resilient, robust system. And in that role, of course, we have critical parties in this called system operators. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So we do have the Slido app. We'll be having some conversations, and then we'll kind of have a look at the questions coming through on that. So I'm joined by two great guests to discuss this. So firstly, we have Anne-Marie from the Future System Operator. Is that currently from the Electricity System Operator?
To be Future System Operator,
okay.
Yeah, so currently the Electricity System Operator.
Okay. My first question was going to be whether you've got a better name yet than FSO, because presumably you can't be the Future System Operator forever.
Yeah, no, afraid not. System operator. And actually in legislation it's the Independent System Operator, so it's even more complicated. But no, hey, maybe we can have a quiz on that. I think it would be a good way to engage across industry.
Okay, so that's your key question for the FSO, is what to call it. So we obviously have a kind of, a live question about, we're changing the system operator. It's moving from the Electricity System Operator to an independent Future System Operator. So clearly lots to get our teeth into there, and that is part of the energy bill and part of government policy, or at least it was when I started the conversation. If it changes in the next half an hour, please do tweet me or something. But currently still the government's committed to this journey to a Future System Operator. And then, of course, we have, as we've heard, the important role of local and the role of DNOs becoming DSOs, and joined by Sotiris from UKPN, who also chairs Open Networks. Welcome, Sotiris. Is DSO, have you seen the kind of transition to a DSO now as something that's really kind of building momentum in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think networks, through things that we now call DSO, have been delivering benefits over at least the last decade. And a lot of the work that networks are doing, and we now talk in the context of DSO, which is, how you maximize the network, the utilization of the network using technology, data, flexibility, really come from a lot of the innovation that has taken place over the last 10 years. So this conference here, for me, is actually a very, very important part of where we go in the future.
Right.
And it's worth saying that it's really for Ofgem's decision back in 2010, and whoever was at that team, to put the Low Carbon Networks Fund, which is £500 million, on the table in 2010 for networks to think about the energy transition at the point that it was not, if you like, the most urgent need, has really driven a lot of the cultural change and a lot of the things that we are now able to use looking forward. So whether it's connection of renewables, whether it's flexibility that we're leading in the world, we've seen a huge progress. And of course, the next decade is going to be critical. And with the price control, the DSO now becomes a thing in our price control. And as regulated monopolies, if it's in the regulation, there's absolutely much more focus and drive, clear KPIs, incentives, and hopefully larger than currently advertised incentives, but incentives to drive it forward.
We're getting into Ofgem's draft determinations already. I'm sure we'll come back to some of that. Anne-Marie, we've all, I think, heard a lot about the FSO. I think it probably at the moment it's like everyone's, it's going to solve everything for everyone. It's going to be so where actually are we on the journey? How much has already changed? And what sort of thinking and planning is going on within the existing body, which is already there, to become this new entity?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And maybe I'll just start by addressing your earlier point, just to make sure that everyone in the room is on the same page in terms of the FSO and whether that's moving through the energy bill, through legislation. I think it's something to mention that the FSO we see as incredibly important to move forward with net zero. And it has cross-party support, creating this independent, both from government, but from industry we see as essential. I think one of the biggest values of the FSO is having that independent voice, that independent voice across the advisory space. So that's a new capability, really. So you can already see the future energy scenarios. We already have documents that are published around what the networks need and also options of how we're going to fulfill those. But actually having a greater remit across different parts of the sector is going to be essential. It's one of the key kind of new roles of the FSO, if you will. So where we are currently on a very practical level, the FSO program, which is where I sit, we're really split into two parts. There's that practical transition away from National Grid Group so that we can become this independent system operator. And then there's the transformational element, so the new roles that we're going to take on, those new responsibilities that are set out in the legislation. And that's things like the new Office of Energy Resilience and Emergency Management. So we are already collaborating very closely with our gas partners in the space of pre-emergency preparations, but actually having an independent office that can look at with a whole system lens, really, I think is going to be essential. And then some of the gas strategic roles, longer term planning, we're looking at how we can transition those over so that it works across both gas and electricity transmission areas. And looking at the advisory space, whole system planning, whole system market development. There's various elements. I think the remit of the FSO is really exciting. And we're trying to understand now within the FSO program how we're going to do that. And I think it's really worth pointing out that this isn't a day one, we can do everything situation. This is a transition over time. You know, when we have day one of the FSO, when that gets decided, we'll have the skills and capabilities for a certain amount of this whole system thinking and moving forward. But actually, there's an appreciation there that it's going to take longer to move fully to the true capability of the FSO, what it's really set out to do, and almost, I don't want to call it a gap in industry, but we really see it at the moment in many ways. We know a lot of the things we need to do, but actually how we get there is really important. So that overarching advisor or overarching strategic direction, be it in markets or planning, I think when we get there, it's going to really change the dial.
Okay. Can you just give me a quick example of one thing that you and the FSO will be doing and thinking about, or one of the problems you'll be mulling over and trying to solve that you wouldn't have been doing a year ago or 2 years ago, or when you were the ESO?
Yeah, so maybe I'll stick with the emergency space. It's something that I'm a little bit closer to, working on a recent electricity and gas interactions project. So it's wrong to say that this isn't done at the moment. It's done massively. There's huge amounts of efforts into winter preparations and ensuring safe, secure, reliable systems, and that's speaking across gas and electricity. I think having an independent department, be it, or whether it's a directorate, that's all still to be determined, but an independent body that's looking at scenario planning, but cross-vector, looking at how we look at scenarios, for example, pre an event situation, but also that post-event analysis, but from the lens of whole energy, which will be different. That's not something that the ESO currently does. That's definitely stretching up the breadth of the areas that we cover across the industry.
Okay, excellent. Some questions coming in, which will perhaps come back to around the kind of the governance structure and who you're accountable to and how you relate to BEIS, which I know are quite kind of still live questions. One of the themes that's come out for me from this conference is the fact that we do need to think about, we need a bit of a plan. We can't, and if we are going to, what was it, Keir Starmer announced 4 times the offshore wind, 3 times offshore wind, 10, I can't remember, huge numbers, in 6 years or 7 years or something, then we're really going to, we're going to need the network for that to connect to. We're going to need to operate it in a really smart way. So we're going to need to think forward. So system operators, are going to have quite a responsibility in that space. So maybe start with yourself, Satiris. What's your thinking about how as you take on more thinking and more kind of planning, how we make sure that the system is ready for the enormous scale of change? And I've just mentioned supply. There's obviously demand, electric vehicles, heat pumps, maybe particularly relevant from your point of view.
Absolutely.
How are we going to make sure that you're ready for that, to think ahead, think that long term, so we don't get in 5 years and I plug in my car and I don't know, I'm a Daily Mail reader, and I've been told by the government to buy an EV, and then I can't plug my EV in. I'm not going to be very, very happy.
Yeah, and there's two domains we need to look at, right? So as distribution networks, the first thing we've got to look at is we provide a network that's fit for purpose and is not a blocker to decarbonization, right? So we need to be able to serve the capacity demand that we have on our network.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? Okay, things are a bit more uncertain, but there's more technology. We're becoming better and better at forecasting. We are going to be using flexibility to manage the demand and perhaps potential delays in the ability to build network, and also that combined with with strategically reinforcing the network. I think you've got to you are able to deliver on that. So I think that's your first layer, if you like. Make sure that the distribution network is not a barrier. I think the second bit is making sure that the combination of networks is not a barrier, which is then the transmission distribution, which goes back to how do we solve the problem. And currently the transmission network has 310 gigawatts of contracted connections, application for connecting, and at the same time we see a lot of demand for connection distribution network. So I think that's really where the whole system planning and looking at the interfaces and working much closer in terms of data, literally on an open book basis, which is this is our planning assumptions, this is how we've estimated what can be accommodated at transmission distribution, and then jointly trying to find the best solution for customers across the network within our regulatory domains and within our duties and responsibilities. I think that's really the bit that we'll have to attack at scale. We are doing it. We are doing it where we have hotspots. At UKPN, we have an area across Sussex and Kent with huge amount of renewables, interconnectors, not so much synchronous generators. We've been working with National Grid, the ESO and the TO since 2016. And we enabled 1 gigawatt of additional capacity in the region to connect just by opening the book and sharing data. Yeah. Before we even go to operability solutions and smart markets and more complex operational control systems. But we are getting into a world where you need to do this at almost at every grid supply point and interface across the country.
Yeah. Okay, so if I go out now and talk to organizations Regen knows and loves and works with, and are members of ours, developers, investors, storage, solar, etc. The one thing they'll talk to me about is grid and network and capacity. So we're talking about some of the solutions there, Stiris. I guess, can they be, and there's a lot to do now, but can they be assured, do you think, that with a new independent future system operator in 5-10 years' time, we won't be sitting there saying, I can't connect all the stuff that's needed? Is that part of the role? Is there now someone who's going to make sure all the great ideas Stiris has outlined actually happen in practice, and the wires get built, bootstraps up from south to north, etc.?
Yeah, and I think we don't need to wait for the future system operators to see progress in that area. I think you touch on a really important point, and it's something that we're really conscious of. For instance, the connections process currently, as it stands, we know has limitations. It was a connections process that was developed at a different time when you're connecting far fewer assets per year, far fewer applications. And now with the rapid increase in applications, the rapid increase in low carbon technologies wanting to connect to the grid, we know there's a real pinch point. We know there's a queue in that connections process. I think there's things happening already that are helping to unplug that. We have the recently announced tech amnesty, trying to look at creating space for those projects that are potentially more ready than others. So there's this want to rejig to make sure that projects and investments that are ready to be connected can have that place on the queue, but actually ones that need more time for whatever reason, there's a reordering. So I think that's something we're seeing now. We're also seeing the changes to code to enable some of this prioritization to support, that rapid connection of low carbon technologies. But I think it's also worth pointing out we have things like the holistic network design. So this year we published the first holistic network design. That was on request from the government, so looking at how we can connect, or what needs to be done to connect more offshore wind. And with the government targets for 2030, I think it's 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. That's a huge addition onto the network. And the holistic network design looks at that in a wider sense. But then that flows through to another concept being discussed at the moment, which is the central strategic network plan. And that's really different. That'll be a step change. Yeah. So we go from prioritizing cost efficiencies to actually making sure that we're considering environmental aspects, societal aspects. And a key difference with the centralized strategic network plan will be that strategic investment need. And so really, as an ESO, we're starting to look in that space. But you can see that when we move to the FSO and we have that independence, actually what we're advising on then is where is strategic investment needed? And that strategic investment to reach our net zero targets. So you can see that the lens is moving towards the trilemma, essentially. How do you move forward to create a net zero world whilst also ensuring affordability, reliability, and a secure system, which is what powers these great lights on us right now.
So I think everything you say, I think everyone in the industry would recognize, and I think all the kind of building blocks and the objectives are in place. I think what people would feel is it's a bit slow. There's not enough emphasis. They're not seeing chief execs of key organizations coming up and saying, I'm going to put everything into this. It feels, and it's a bit reactive. We're here, we're trying to sort it out now, but we knew it was coming, frankly. There's nothing, you guys have been doing fairs and you guys have been doing D-fairs for a number of years now. There's no real great surprises here, and yet we are stuck. No one can connect stuff. So can we get more proactive?
I think that, nobody can connect is an exaggeration, though, right? I think, we have to be balanced here. We had the solar boom. There was a lot of doubt. Are we going to deal with the solar boom? Every project that was ready to connect has connected out of that generation. We have 30 gigawatts of distributed generation connected to distribution networks. We have now seen unprecedented levels, and I think it's different seeing the forecast, and it's different, actually having the situation at hand. The mix has changed, so a lot of the pipeline, in some cases, is batteries. So there's, we are moving fast over solving the question of how do you actually model storage and how do you account for batteries on the network, given the diversity of the asset. And that's an immature market that is now maturing, and we'll have to deal with differently. So, I think we are quickly moving towards find ways and learning by doing to keep continuing and utilizing our networks, because there's still capacity on the networks. It might be contracted capacity, but there's physical capacity. Continue moving forward to make sure that all the projects that are ready to connect, right? And we don't, we don't have the issues. But, some of the code, some of the processes, some of the things we have to fix them on the fly. We want to race 1,000 kilometers, but then,
I guess to give an example of thinking ahead, we're talking about storage, and I guess a lot of people are talking about hydrogen and hydrogen electrolysis, and that's going to be a key part of the system. Of course, that's going to have to connect somewhere, and is that the kind of thing you think the FSO could be modeling, thinking about? I remember, could think now about, we could talk to the industry about where it might connect, what it might need, and we can start to think that in our planning. Do you see that level of kind of analysis starting to happen?
Absolutely. I think whether specifically hydrogen now is within the ESO, I think we're considering that within our FES scenarios currently, but it's certainly the direction of travel. I think initially the FSO, we talk about this day one FSO, what's practical to the start. We understand its importance, so you want to ensure it's a success from the beginning. Really, it's that collaboration between electricity and gas. But then it's moving through to those vectors, so certainly hydrogen is a space. And I think we can see that hydrogen, for example, investment in hydrogen is being supported by some of the other recommendations, some of the changes to the energy pricing, for example. There's certain conversations going on across the industry where we're looking to ensure that the right investment where we need it is being supported, and that's for things like energy storage and hydrogen. But just to add a point from the government perspective, in the British Energy Security Strategy, what was good to see in that strategy was government's recognition, really, that they also have a part to play. So, for instance, the approvals process, the regulatory approvals process for onshore investment, that infrastructure reinforcement, they've recognised a need to really change the dial on that and step change, equally more anticipatory funding. for certain huge investments. So I think everyone's moving in the same direction. We can see that from all parties that need to play in this game.
Okay, and we've mentioned flexibility, and Sturz, you talked about that a lot and the kind of operability. So clearly, the ESO already has its ancillary services and its balancing mechanisms. That's the main market for storage providers and flex providers and demand-side response, but equally, DSOs are coming into that market. Is there as we've got the two together today, how are we going to join that up? Because at the moment, it's quite, if I want to provide flex to the market service, it's pretty difficult to stack my revenues in the jargon between the two of you. And indeed, I might actually get a signal from you, fire everything up, and that's actually precisely the opposite of what Sotiris wants, because that causes a problem on his network. So unless there's a connection there, do you see that kind of joint working coming forward? Will it be easier with the FSO as a kind of government-owned body? Sotiris,
Yeah, so I think there's some simple things that we can do and we should be doing as soon as possible. So for example, if you're a flex provider and you have a resource and you register in an ESO ancillary service marketplace, then you should be visible from a DSO marketplace. So there's I think we were talking before, there's some data plumbing that needs to be done to get a better experience. In terms of how you coordinate, we need to be honest, the ESO's markets and the wholesale markets are going to be the vast majority of the revenues, right? You are not going to stack investment on just DSO revenues. It's the cherry on the top. So we need to make this work. And I think the FSO will have a role in helping the DSOs and the wider market make this work. Okay. In terms of the operational coordination, we've got the Open Networks collaboration platform with the networks and the system operators. And one of the things we're working on is primacy rules, which is essentially operational coordination rules, where we make these decisions in terms of if there is one resource and it has two different contracts, in which case which contract will be called upon. Okay. It's part of the Smart Systems Plan. It's been coming for a while. It's one of the things frankly we need to do faster and kind of get a clear view to the market. But there are some simple things in terms of how you register, how you coordinate, that will help providers to move it forward. And as I said, as part of Open Networks, there's a bit about standardization of the DSO flexibility products. We get a lot of feedback on that, is that the experience is different. We need to fix that. We need to fix that to help, if you like, that overall coordination challenge.
Okay, that's a question with a bit more time, I'd love to dive into a bit more detail, but conscious we have a short session. Just, again, looking at the questions coming through and thinking about the last session, there was a discussion about local energy planning, local air energy plans. So I guess thinking about the future role of the FSO and the DSO, let's take a situation where a town, a city, is thinking about the role in heating in the future between perhaps heat networks, heat pumps, or possibly a hydrogen through the gas network. And that's a decision which can't just be left to individuals because there's an infrastructure implication. So who takes that decision in the future? Is it Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester? Is it yourself, Sotiris, as they're running the DSO? Or is it yourself, the FSO, saying this is the most effective national heating whole system approach, and we're going to set out what goes where?
Yeah, if I start, I think the honest answer is we're working that through now. I think we recognise that needs to come together. What I can say is, the ambition for the FSO is to be that central strategic planner, almost that overarching planner across the industry. So I think there's the potential that the FSO will play a significant part in that. I think it's those discussions that we're trying to understand now. But we do know that it works well with the ambition for our advisory function of the FSO, and a big part we'll play is around policy and working really closely with government. So I think there was a question earlier where you touched about how the FSO would work with government. I mean, we already have very strong relationships with both government and the regulator, and maybe that will shift that relationship. We work collaboratively now, and I think the independence of the FSO will mean that voice, that impartial voice, can really help to advise on policy that we think will have a strategic difference, will make a strategic difference. So I think...
So I was just thinking that one of your colleagues, when I asked about the model for working together between independence and government, said the best model was the Bank of England, and I don't know, it just made me think that maybe that wasn't the best thing to wish for right at the moment. But yeah, so those kind of how those relationships work, it sounds like that's still something that's evolving.
Absolutely. It's being formed now. So we're in very close conversations with the government to try and establish those rules of how to work in this new future state. But what I can say is everybody's moving in the same direction. The collaboration between the parties is really strong because everybody knows that holistic view, that direction, that connecting of the dots is so essential. To be able to give investors confidence, it's really about ensuring that we create the confidence in the market and within the industry.
Okay, and we're running close to the end of time, Sarah, so might just giving you the chance to finally answer that question about the kind of local and the decision making and the FSO, DSO, local democracy.
Yeah, so I think the network, so the DSO and the DNO, we're setting up the DSO as a legally separate entity, so it's going to provide independent decision making on electricity, but it will still be biased towards electricity. I think gas is biased towards gas, so the networks cannot be the decision maker.
Not you, in other words. It's not you making decisions.
So it's not going to be. But I think the local government has a climate energy action plan, has worked through the local area energy plan with our support and the gas network support. So it has to be a regional body, at least in our view, that is led by Andy Burnham or Sadiq Khan or the relevant person. And it doesn't need to be a new body. It can be a collection of stakeholders under a set of terms of reference for a specific region. And they should be making the strategic decisions, supported.
Yeah, does there need to be a check that all this stuff fits together so that it's not a patchwork of different decisions?
Yeah.
So some kind of,
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I'm really enjoying this chat. I could keep going, but apparently I'm not allowed to. So thank you very much. Really, it's great to get us insight into how the kind of this new thing we've heard of the FSO is starting to emerge and the sort of thinking that's going on and how you see it going and to understand understand how the FSO and DSO might engage and the various roles in the future. So many thanks both of you, and if we could thank our speakers in the usual way. Excellent. You're free to go.